Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Practicalities podcast. I am your host, Miles, or Emdy, and I'm here with my co-host and good friend, Andrew or Senn. Today we're going to be talking about making reads in Super Smash Bros. But before that, got to do the obligatory plugging. Just like to take a second to remind you all to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things go a long way in supporting us and helping make the podcast great. And they enable us to do things like have Sonics on the podcast. So if you want more cool guests or cool topics, I highly encourage you to do that. And let us know in the comment section what you would like to hear more of. We also very recently launched both our Discord and Ko-fi. I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced. The Ko-fi is going to be sort of our substitute for Patreon. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, monetarily, then that's the best way to go about it. And we've got multiple different tiers starting for as little as $2. And there's going to be all sorts of great benefits like bonus content and access to live coaching, things like that. So if you're interested in really upping your game in Smash, I highly recommend you checking that out. And also joining our Discord to stay updated with the podcast. It's where all of our new videos are going to go. And be in a community of improvement-minded individuals. As always, the links to all those things will be in the description below. So getting into our topic today, we're talking about making reads in Smash, and what sort of gave us the idea for doing this as a topic this week was someone in my local scene approached me and asked, I feel like I need to get better at making reads, and I don't know how to do that. You know, like reading my opponent, I don't even know where to start with that, but I feel like that's like the next step for me. And before I answered, I took a second and I was like, well, it's really not a concise way to answer that. It really goes a lot deeper than simply knowing what your opponent is going to do. There's a lot that goes into that. And so I really feel like to thoroughly answer this question, needed to do a podcast on it. And hopefully we can, at the very least, touch on all the basics of making reads. And to start, I feel like it's important to ask, what is a read? What actually constitutes a read? What do you think, Andrew?
So people throw out the word read a lot. I think that to call something a read, that basically means that you have to have information first. It is based on something. Just F-smashing after somebody whiffs something because it might hit something. That's not really a read. That's more of a guess, right? And you're going to see guesses everywhere. Guesses will be a huge part of the game at every level, really. But to call it a read is kind of like ill-conceived because it's not based on particular information. And that's kind of what the first thing we want to talk about today is gaining that information. So to read people, right? To break their ankles, know everything they're going to do, all that stuff that people talk about. You have to actually be getting that information from somewhere. You can't just know it because you know it. That's not how it works, right? There are things like understanding a matchup that you're playing or seeing a situation a lot where it just keeps replaying. A big one, especially in mid-level plays, is you have Cloud or something, right? And he comes down off the platform with a fair on your shield. And then he's spot dodge, cross slashing. And you're over here oh, he does this every single time. He does it every time. Next time, I'm going to roll behind the spot dodge, cross slash, and hit it. I'm going to hit it this way. I'm going to hit it that way. That's the first initial, oh, I recognize the pattern. I want to do something about it. And of course, the deeper you go into this, the more broad it becomes. I think that the first thing that I'd want to talk about with gathering information and talking about how to get better at reading people is understanding where you want to read them. What are you actually looking at? Because you're not going to be able to memorize every single thing your opponent does in every situation, nor is your opponent going to do the exact same thing in every situation for the same reasons. And of course, this only is more true the higher level that you get. A lot of the time, when you're playing somebody, you're going to be playing, your base game plan, you're playing this matchup, and then there's these key spots. A big one for almost any character is what are they doing at the ledge. People are pretty early perceptive to how people get off the ledge, what do they do in the corner. Another one is like people, when they fight zoners a lot of the time, they learn how to pay attention to patterns because you're dealing with projectiles that are not immediately punishable. And it's like, okay, what does he do after the charge shot? What does he do after he shoots this missile? That's where you get to like hitting rolls and stuff. It's where you get to the super hard reads, like, oh my god, he Ganondorf F smashed his roll. He's in his head. I think that a lot of the time people see that stuff and then they're like, man, dude, that guy's like on some genius shit. How did he do that? Can I be good enough to where I can F smash people? Is that what top level is? And it's like not. It like almost never is, unless you're light. At collision. Sorry, buddy. But a lot of the time reads are going to be like, I guess the term soft reads, hard reads, that gets thrown out a lot. And the way that I'm familiar with that is like commitment level. How hard are you committing to punishing this thing that you're reading? How much of a risk is it to go for this specific thing? And that kind of gets into opportunity cost. What are you foregoing? A lot of that stuff with understanding in this situation, and we'll talk about the ledge, right? Where, okay, you're fighting the Samus, and they kind of always neutral get up and then roll in, right? And you're pretty sure they're going to do that. Low level, you're just going to F-smash that. You see it, you're like, I'll hit this pretty hard. But the higher level you get, where people will mix up their options more, you don't want to just commit to covering this roll immediately, and you can't just commit with something like an F-smash, where now you're just standing there. You're committed to this one option. You're not covering jump. You're not covering their different like timings of all these things they can do. You're just looking in this one spot. That's like a hard read. And most of the time, especially at like higher levels, you're not going to see much of that. It's a lot more of the game's going really fast. You're playing the most important interactions and matchups. You're going to see a lot of the same things, but in different ways. And you're going to have a lot more soft reads. Things like catching inward drift on a jump with a Palutena back air. And choosing like where to distinguish, oh, should I be trying to call out all the time? Or, just do my ledge trap, covering things. And gaining that information to do those things effectively, as opposed to just willy-nilly, what if he jumps though, and then back airing, is the biggest difference between having reads that are accurate and playing out well for you, and feeling like your decision making is almost random, and it's like people are just getting hit by it or they're not. And you want as much control of that as you can have.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier opportunity cost is sort of the defining factor of what makes it a hard versus a soft read. And, if you commit to F-smashing that roll-in on a Samus, then the opportunity cost is very high. You lose not only your ability to cover other options and hold your advantage state, but you're oftentimes at risk of getting hit as well. And so it's very much high risk, high reward, skewed on both ends of the axis as far as it can possibly go. And as you mentioned, those sort of plays are almost not present at the highest levels of play. And when they are, they're a little bit more nuanced than Warlock Punch. With softer reads, let's say you're playing Fox ledge trapping this Samus player, and you're pressing Nair sort of at that neutral get up right over ledge jump range at different timings. You're making every single Nair that you press, you're making very small soft call outs over and over again. There's not really you can press that mindlessly, but there isn't as much a mindlessness at the highest levels of play. You're soft punishing an array of options. You get neutral get up at the specific timing. You stuff out their ledge jumps. And those sort of reads are a lot of what we take for granted as autopilot gameplay. And at the highest levels of play, that is really as hard as it gets a lot of the time, because top level players intuitively have a high understanding of opportunity cost. And when they do go for those big plays, in the rare instances where you see them, it's often there's a very high level of intentionality behind it, because they are directing their opponent towards the decision making that leads them to get those large punishes. And that sort of direction is the process that we refer to as conditioning. And so I'm curious as to how you view conditioning as a learnable and developable skill for the lower levels of play.
Conditioning. Okay, so with conditioning your opponent, that's basically, I wish I could remember the name of the actual analogy with the dog and the bell, but Pavlov.
Yeah.
What is it?
Pavlov's dogs?
Pavlov.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, conditioning is basically just teaching somebody, like in a specific interaction, that they are good to go for a certain option. So I think a lot of people get basic conditioning down to like a very simple degree when they're playing the game, and they're doing things like not covering air dodges out of their down throw setups and stuff like that. Very basic, like linear traps on defensive options, and they choose to always cover jump or something. They teach you that air dodging's okay, and then they have their big brain moment at the end of the stock where they wait for that air dodge and then they kill you even earlier than they would have been able to, or something like that, right? But conditioning can be found in a ton of areas in the game. A lot of characters have their best tools, their money makers that can't cover every single option. Another great example is Fox, where even though Fox's grab is definitely a lot better than we used to give it credit for, what Fox wants is for you to be above him. He wants to up air you. That's what he wants, right? He wants to full hop on you and he wants to up air you. And as you, the player fighting the Fox, you don't want to just start jumping. You don't want to just let him have his cash money. You have to maneuver around that. You're usually going to be doing that with like horizontal spacing, a bunch of shield, just walling out, stuff like that. And then Fox, his goal is to play in a way where he can condition you to choose options to avoid his up air, his strong, hard-hitting stuff by doing those rolls, by attacking preemptively, so he can snuff that out. He starts getting that up. He starts doing more damage. And now you're like, oh man, I'm getting hit for staying on the ground. I'm getting attacked for these rolls. What do I do here? And that's where you start jumping. It's like your immediate fight or flight. That's the next thing you do. And now you're doing exactly what the Fox wanted you to do in the first place. I think for a lot of characters, some off the top of my mind are like Zero Suit, Sheik, Diddy Kong, Joker, with very flexible game plans who need kind of specific hits, especially at certain percents. It's a really big deal for them to be able to condition certain responses throughout the game so they can cash out later. And this is a big thing when it comes to reading people effectively, because even though you're playing somebody and you're gaining information, you're not always going to want to cash out on that information. Maybe somebody jumps in the corner a lot and you're like, okay, I'm going to hit this with like a back air. But what if that back air doesn't do anything? What if you don't actually want that back air? I play Sheik, and a lot of the time, people like to whiff in the corner. They'll neutral get up, they'll down tilt and stuff like that. Just to stuff out my normal ledge trapping that I do of like nairs, dash back F tilts, grabbing normal get up, stuff like that. And I like that because then they roll around to about 100%. I'm not hitting them for wake up down tilting, and now I get a nair, and then I get a bouncing fish, and then they die, and I'm happy. It's a very important part of not only making sure that you can get accurate reads, but that your reads are leading to the things you actually want. You don't want to pay attention to something and then cash out your read on somebody for like a Sheik nair or a Squirtle up air. You want to pay attention to the options your opponent is choosing so you can adjust how you want to play that out to maximize your own reward. That is the complicated half one. The other half is, how do you get that information? Where are you supposed to find it in the first place? What should you be looking at to get this conditioning? Because a lot of the time, you can get stumped with this whole, how do I condition something if it's not scary yet? What do you do when they're not actually afraid to jump until you can kill them for jumping? You know, stuff like that. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about it.
Sure. I think that, the most simple conditioning that we discuss, that we just went over, is using the threat of something to achieve something else. But it works in the opposite direction, where allowing something to happen repeatedly is sort of a positive conditioning, as opposed to the negative conditioning that comes with, showing your opponent that you will swing that fox up air. And to elaborate on that, it's, a lot of players and characters have default behaviors that they really heavily lean in towards. The Game & Watch is going to run up shield in neutral a lot. And you can theoretically look to try to take the grab and directly counterplay the shield every time you see it. But then you run into the problem that we were just discussing, where is that even what I want in this moment? Am I cashing out too soon? Obviously, if you're playing a character like Palu, grabbing Game & Watch at 0% is going to have a lot higher reward than grabbing him at 50%, as will grabbing him at 150%. But Game & Watch is going to be doing that shield regardless, so how do you ensure that when you really need it, you get it? And that is sort of that more positive conditioning of allowing your opponent to do things. And to the best players in the world are really excellent at observing the game while they play it. They'll see the obvious things, like Cloud jumping backwards at me. The next step, obviously, from that position is back air, or maybe the same thing with Palu jumping backwards at you, or Mario running at you in a straight line. It's pretty likely that he's going to look for the jump up air, the short hop back air. And these common behaviors allow us to make assumptions about what's to come next. And that's sort of the foundation of gathering information, is that, you can't literally use... You can't literally know everything your opponent's going to do in every situation. A lot of the times they're going to have tells or lead-ins that allow you to draw conclusions about what you're likely to see next. So a really good example of that is when Kazuya does that IDJ, forward air, nair, forward air, whatever. You see that right in front of you. Without actually seeing a Kazuya player in front of me, it's pretty easy to make an assumption about what move is coming out once they hit the ground. Or like we were talking about with Game & Watch earlier, if they're presenting shield a lot, it's pretty easy to make an assumption there as to what we're going to see if we land in front of the shield. And these strongest options that these characters have allow us to gain basic information. Cloud is going to jump backwards at you a lot in a game, and if you see that 100 times over, then you'll start to get a pretty good sense of when the back air is coming, where, at what spacing, what provokes them to jump in the first place. And this is what allows, the best of the best to gather information on players who don't make a lot of commitments. It's very easy to see the Elite Smash Samus shoot the fully charged charge shot, and then he'll roll like twice. But how do you gather information on top players when they're not going to give you extremely telegraphed, easy things like that to pick up on? You base it off of what you're likely to see and what they've already given you in smaller ways, smaller little tells like we're talking about. So if that Kazuya shows you that fair nair, like we were talking about earlier, electric is very likely to follow. And electric in and of itself is not something that you can necessarily read or capitalize on, because they can just throw that at any time. But if you have the full second and a half, however long, to see them in the air present their strongest options to you, then that acts as the tell for what's coming next. And that lets us make a lot of soft and hard reads around it. And it also works in response to what you're doing. So obviously, we were talking earlier about showing the threat of the fox upper to point them in the direction that they want them to go. And that really applies to every action that you have. It's very much on some Isaac Newton shit of every action has, a reaction, so to speak. So even just very small and minute things like dashing towards your opponent can provoke meaningful reactions or even a meaningful lack of reaction that you can capitalize on later. So if I was running at someone and I, full hop into them with that fox, if I'm playing fox in the circumstance, and I've shown nair a few times, then a realistic counteraction that you might see from your opponent is shielding as soon as you start your jump. And from there, you can sort of take on the next step of, okay, well, they're going to jump here. So how do I counterplay this? Or if I show this jump, I know that the shield comes. And so how do I counterplay this realistically? I could tomahawk with a grab, land and mix up timings a little bit with multiple jumps in that spot, double jump to force them into a reaction. And it all sort of layers upon itself, and it lets you make the most out of the tiniest amounts of information that your opponent gives you. And the real takeaway from this is that even if your opponent makes what looks like no commitments, you have to understand that at every single moment of the game, they are giving you usable information. You just have to know how to disseminate from that. And so I'm curious as to what you feel is the basic thought process you should have of picking up on this information and then actually putting it in action and using it.
Yeah, so a lot of that has to do with understanding the field, knowing the matchup, knowing what your character is capable of hitting in what ways, knowing what the other guy also likes to hit, what they can hit. I know I've heard a lot of people talk about being like a read-based player, stuff like that, where it's like, oh, they just focus on the other guy. And that is a part of the game, and you're going to do that a lot. But to get better at reads, you have to understand the full picture. And that gets into a lot of understanding risk-reward behind interactions. You have to have the awareness of, oh, what percent am I at? Where are we on the stage? And having like the mental stack of what has actually happened here. What am I in danger of? Prioritizing that kind of thing can be difficult. So a lot of the times when you're playing people, and like you said, you're like finding someone, and it just seems like they're never actually committing to anything. It's like, oh, how am I supposed to punish this? They're just like ambiguously doing safe stuff everywhere, but they are being safe from something. They're avoiding something. There's some kind of objective going on, and finding tells in something that is as ambiguous as neutral can be, or even like more linear spots in the game, like at the ledge or in juggle situations on platforms, stuff like that. It can feel kind of overwhelming. Like it just gets down to only guessing, and it's like, well, what am I doing here? Is everything just decided by if it kills or not? It helps a lot to understand every interaction on its own. One of the biggest things that I tell people when they are asking me questions about how to improve, what do I do about this spot, is that I hate generalizations. I love to break down everything as specifically as you can so you can choose your best options for it, because especially the higher level you go, the things that you're going to be paying attention to, your tells, that you're going to like look for to know when you can actually jump on something. Sometimes it's going to be minute things like, where do they start their dash? Where on this platform are they like jumping from? What is their drift? How high have they been doing like certain aerials? Sometimes it's a lot of like off stage. You have a iffy situation in an edge guard. You both make it back. You both grab the ledge, and then you see them immediately buffer like a get up attack, right? Stuff like that. And it gets kind of difficult to keep track of every single minute situation. So you can't tunnel vision on any like one of those things. You kind of have to be aware of what do you want your character, what percent are they at, Uh, and in the position that you and your opponent are in, uh, is there any like green flag for you to cash out? So for me, right, to give an example, a lot of the time at kill percent, what I want is landing down a tipper down tilt, rising needles, landing there, drag down up air, or even like F tilt by a platform, right? I have all these options to look out for, and I just need to find a way to get my opponent to give me one of them. Uh, and the things that I'll pay attention to are usually for down tilts, for example, people are pretty good at landing with aerials against Sheik, like away from her. So I can't whiff punish it with anything super scary. You know, they do a landing aerial. I can't near bouncing fish it. Uh, they're using their shield in the corner, stuff like that. And I can't mess with it in a way that I want. So even if I understand it, it's like, oh, well, I don't want to just take the grab. I don't want to just dash attack it. I want to kill them. And obviously you won't always be able to, but that's why it's important to pay attention to specific little details like their drift. What moves are they using? Can you hurt box shift like through a Mega Man forward air to down tilt it? If a character's got like a weaker recovery, then maybe I will take the grab. Maybe I want to get behind them. Taking advantage of the whole situation in its entirety and looking for every single way that could be like worth hitting someone. Seeing the whole forest, you know, you need that so that you can take these little details, these little cues, and actually turn them into something. Because you can't properly respond to every single thing your opponent gives to you. Everybody has like a similar amount of things they can keep track of consciously and remember, and you don't just increase that when you become better at the game. You don't just, oh, now I can remember 5 times as many things. What it really is prioritizing what you're paying attention to and condensing the information you're taking in into like the best convertible ways, the most important spots that you can cash out for, stuff like that. I think that that's kind of the biggest thing that separates like a mid-level player from a high-level player, from a top-level player, is what are they actually looking at? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it is really important to talk about how we, you know, there's the sort of the myth that the very best players just literally see everything in front of them and they remember it. You know, they see that one jump, they're like, okay, that jump is there. They'll give me that later. Times 100. You know, it's not feasible or practical for any player, even at the highest levels of play, to simply just know everything, even if it's shown to them. And that emphasis on being able to disseminate what is usable information to get those big cash outs later, you know, those big overshot back airs to kill someone pretty early for, you know, full hopping in the corner, that kind of thing. And actually bridging the gap and finding that information and understanding what you're able to convert off of. You know, there's a lot nuance that goes into that. Like we were talking about earlier, you know, you have to understand the matchup that you're playing, the situation that you're in, the habits of your opponent, the stage, everything. There's a lot that goes into everything. And it can definitely seem like a lot to someone who's sort of just trying to step into that next level of play and start to really understand how, you know, to make valuable callouts. And I think that a lot of lower and mid-level players really get hung up on sort of that idea of trying to punish everything. And while that sounds very simplistic and obvious and dumb, it is a very real thing where it sort of becomes a information paralysis. You know, there's so much going on that they try to make the big play whenever is actually possible. And it becomes this sort of game where you're not really actually counterplaying your opponent. You're more just sort of like racing to do the big hit and we oftentimes, you refer to it. The word like refresh rate gets thrown around a lot, where used to describe situational awareness in Smash Bros. And how often you're able to assess the situation. When you see those lower levels of play, where you'll see lower refresh rates, you'll see a lot of players trying to take that big cash out over and over and over again, looking for their highest reward combo starter, swinging at every possible spot, every location where it could be given to them, and what that result in is some really brutally ugly gameplay. And you'll get players that literally cannot hit each other, and it sort of becomes a thing where trying to understand everything that your opponent is doing can be so overwhelming that you forget how reaction play slots in. And so understanding how to develop a balance of read-based play, as you talked about earlier, and reaction play is really important for setting a framework to continue improving meaningfully. And a lot of the times, I think lower and mid-level players will really forgo one to have the other. They'll try to react to everything and end up accomplishing nothing, or play too proactively on their opponent's actions and end up doing way too much. And I'm curious as to how you feel the balance can be found for a mid-level player looking to develop further.
I think a good general rule of thumb is to, you like learn your good things, your safe things. Okay, this button, when I space this, they can't punish it. I'm playing Palutena, my high damaging thing at these low mid percents is Nair, stuff like that. You're going to be throwing out a lot more guesses, and a lot of your decisions are going to be based off of just like risk reward, in the game stuff, kind of not having anything to do with the option your opponent is choosing, but just theoretically, this is strong. That is like how you start. That's my opinion on it, at the least. And then through starting that way, you play somebody, and that Nair's going to hit her. It's not. A lot of these interactions are going to naturally take their place, and the whole time you're getting information on, did this work? Why did it work? Why didn't it work? And ideally, you're prepared, the answers to these things, but obviously the first time you see something, you're not just going to know it and then be able to punish it. And being kind of like greedy in that sense is what leads to a bunch of whiffing and ugly gameplay of like, oh, I can definitely hit this with this move. Just trying to mismatch things together. I think that a lot of the time, the simpler, cleaner way to digest this kind of information is to you start out with your risk reward, and you start with like the most impactful spots for your character. So if your character is almost always killing like horizontally at the ledge, then that's kind of where you pay the most attention, and you try to get an idea of, how do I get them to do things I want them to do? How do I establish some sort of control in a spot reactively, just because of the pressure that you have by doing like your Palutena back airs or something, to get this kill later? When is it actually worth it for me to cash out? And again, a lot of that is going to be stuff that you prepare for beforehand, you condition for, because you want this back air on this full hop. You want to back throw their neutral get up. You want to hit the roll in a significant way. But if you're just starting out swinging, trying to pivot grab something you haven't actually seen before just because it could work, the success of these actions are determined by risk reward. If you haven't conditioned like actual responses, and you don't have real data saying, oh, they do like to do this in this spot, you don't have like a real reason to act on something, then what you should let guide you is just, if it's good. Is it good? Are you risking some scary potential by putting yourself right at the ledge against this character? And that'll depend on the matchup. It'll depend on the circumstances, like with your percent. And it's not just the ledge, it's everywhere. Some characters like Fox, for example, I I know we've all seen it. Light will just run up and up smash people, and we're just like, huh? Why did he do that? How did he know? There's no way he's just running up and up smashing, because if he does miss, it hurts. But he hits it a lot. And it's because he has like these cues. He's forcing people to make decisions in these similar spots with this just strong game plan. This strong, I'm in air here. I'm going to do these things that are scary by default. They're already safe. And I'm going to watch how you're avoiding them, how you're trying to get into your own groove. And if you watch Light, a lot of the times he doesn't overcomplicate things. He'll stand still. He'll just full hop. And he doesn't bite more than he can chew. He pays attention to the interactions as they come to him. He's playing it safe. And then when he has an idea of what you're going to do, and it's lining up with like what he wants, he cashes out. He bites. A lot of the time for these mid-level players, like you said, they're just trying to cash out all the time, or they don't know how to in the first place. It can be hard to pick your first spots, and that kind of stuff. As you get better, the game is always going to change. What you pay attention to will not be the same now as it will be in like 3 months, maybe. The things that clue you in on your opponent's intentions and your own response of what do I do about it will naturally develop in different ways. Because sometimes you're going to see things like somebody whiffing in place or playing around platforms, for example. And even though you can notice it, you don't know how to call it out effectively, and you don't know what to do about it. So now you change your game plan, like passively, to meet it. You don't want to just start calling it out because you saw it once. Risk reward is still kind of the main factor there, kind of the main factor everywhere. What happens if I'm wrong? What happens if I'm right? What are they actually limited to? What are they reacting to? You have to answer a bunch of questions. So sometimes when you get this information on this person doing this like uncommittal, difficult to deal with thing, the worst thing that you could do is bite early, because now you just gave away, oh, I know what you're doing, and now maybe they won't do it again. Now you're playing more of a guessing game, and you weren't able to hit it the way that you wanted to. You are now just opening yourself up to a new problem that you haven't seen before, and now you don't have information on that. And the game gets super, super guess heavy, and that's not what you want. You want to control as much of it as you can. Just be on top of as many different situations as possible, and you want those situations to be your character's most impactful ones. You want to, and vice versa with your opponent, because it's not just an aggressive thing to read somebody. You need to be aware of what they're looking for, and what they can hurt you with, so you can be mindful of like, it's worth mixing up your options, because you can't pay attention to everything. You can't always mix up for the sake of mixing up. You have to be, you have to let something guide you. And for me, again, I think that the biggest thing is to just focus on what's in the game first. What hurts? What doesn't hurt? What can you actually react to? Base it off of things that you can physically accomplish, regardless of your opponent, and understand like the risk behind all of it. I think that is how you start, and it's also the most efficient way for you to gain the information that you want, because you're doing your strong stuff, they're doing their strong stuff, and it just leads to like a natural flow. That's where adaptation exists, and it's going to go back and forth, right?
Right. And we have really emphasized the importance and the nature and the different elements of the reads that we make regularly in neutral and advantage state. And there for a second, you touched on the consequences of biting too soon, trying to cash out early, and how that shows your opponent that you know what's going on. And so I think that is actually a really good way to transition into talking about the other end of reads and sort of preventing yourself from being read, if that makes sense. More of a defensive element to it. And I feel like it's important to really clarify that, and to just go in preemptively and clear up the misconception that reads are what you're using to open up your opponent, because it works in both ways. You're also using it for damage control, preventing your opponent from accomplishing what they're trying to do, sort of almost reading yourself, if that makes sense. And that plays a really interesting role in disadvantage. A lot of the sort of consensus top level outlook in disadvantage is that you can't really be in control of everything, and it's, it's in the name. It's an inherently disadvantaged state, disadvantageous part of playing. And your goal going in, once those hits start, is damage control. You're trying to make your opponent work as hard as possible for the next few hits that they get to close the stock, etc. And a big part of that is not only understanding what you want to do and how to achieve it, but what your opponent's trying to do and how you prevent them from achieving that. And so it's really important to go into with the data collection mindset on the defensive end as well. And an example of that is understanding that basically every time you get hit, your opponent should realistically, if they're someone who's well versed in data collection and making reads, they're going to be watching for your reactions in these circumstances. They're going to be paying attention to what you do out of low percent hits done, what you do out of the down throw that might not necessarily have a true follow-up, but they can make a read afterwards, sort of like a Palu high percent down throw. And you have to be in data collection mode on that end of the game too. A lot of the times I will let the Palu player get the hits that they want out of the down throw at lower percents, because taking those hits in many circumstances is actually less meaningful than the information you would give them in avoiding the hits. A similar thing with maybe a fox string. I remember, I think it was Mr. E talking about this, how when he gets hit at 0% by light, he sort of just pretends the combo is true and takes all the hits until the finisher comes, gives him the opportunity to reset. And the reason why top players go in with that mindset is because they understand that they can afford to take hits in those circumstances, in that Smash, at the end of the day, is a war of information, and giving your opponent information out of low percent hits done could way down the line lead to them cashing out on one of your most significant habits and disadvantage. If you're mashing air dodge, neutral air dodge out of 0% combos, then chances are when your opponent jumps at you at 150 when your stock's on the line, that you're going to show them neutral air dodge again. And breaking those bad defensive habits is a lot more than people think. It's not just like, oh, they hit me for air dodging there, I shouldn't air dodge next time. It's understanding what you've given your opponent already, what you've brought to the table, what information you've introduced, and using it to make educated guesses or reads about what's next to come. And in a lot of ways, you can use this against your opponent. So let's say theoretically, I'll give Palu the air dodge on down throw the first or second time that we see it. That's a very common situation that you'll see a lot. Palu gets the grab on your neutral get up at 100%, and they don't really have a true way to kill you here, but they're looking for information that they can use to capitalize to theoretically get the stock down the line. So if you show them that air dodge the first or second time, when the situation rolls around, you're in last hit and the game is on the line, and they down throw you in that last hit, chances are they're going to be banking on that air dodge, and you can show jump or something else, and you've potentially won the game by using this information that you very consciously and intentionally given your opponent and twisted it against them. I know that I will do this very frequently with a character like Pokemon Trainer, where a lot of people are looking to close stocks against Pokemon Trainer at the ledge because it's their weakest area, and I'll start the games or the sets without presenting much in the outside of the standard ledge options like ledge jumps, neutral get-ups, rolls, etc. And then deeper into the set, where they're going to be looking to capitalize off of those, then that's when I'll bring to table the Ivysaur, Vine Whip from ledge, all the different aggressive mix-ups that Pokemon Trainer has off the ledge, because you have sort of put in their minds that you're not going to be showing that, and then when it really matters the most, when it is the difference between winning and losing, saving your last stock, that's when you can sort of cash out. And so that concept of cashing out and acting on your reads is something that can be applied to every area of the game, not just from the perspective of playing neutral or playing your own advantage state. And I think that's something that's very important to be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of those things that this whole episode I've kind of been touching on is that being really good at getting reads, being right, has a lot to do with having awareness of situations, being aware of what's even possible, what's going on. The better you know the field, the more accurately you're going to be able to point out cues and choose like the best responses. A lot of getting better at understanding how people think, why they're choosing the options that they are, is just understanding why it would be good or bad in the first place. Obviously, bad situations are always going to be bad situations, and good ones will always be good. If you put your opponent in a spot where they only have 3 options, it's going to be much easier to read them than in raw neutral, right? And I really wanted to make sure it's known that you can't just have one. You can't just hard read people. And you can't just put all of your Smash skill points into this one facet of the game, because you have to understand the game itself to really push that. And it also goes the other way around. I've actually had this happen with quite a few people where, let's say, disadvantage, I put them in a bad spot where we're VOD reviewing and they're talking about them being in like this juggle scenario where they just got out of this combo, and they always choose like the most annoying thing to punish or the most difficult thing to get around for their opponent, but they always choose it, right? A great example of this is like a string, low knockback string on Pikachu, and now he's like mashing Nair back air to the ground. It's kind of hard to deal with a lot of characters, especially who don't have like super big disjoints. And especially with like the multi-hit, it just is a little tricky. And since it's a bad situation where they don't have a lot of other good options available to them, they're just like, well, I'm in a Nair. I'm just going to back air. But what that does is it takes any like thought out of your opponent's game. They don't have to think about the situation anymore because you're presenting them with one possibility, and they no longer have to like consider what else you will do. The situation is important, and it always will be, but it's not the end all be all. Especially in a game like Smash, where you're going to have so many different kinds of interactions everywhere, you want as many chances as you can get. So when you're put in these bad situations where you only have like a coin flip or so, it's still important to be conscious of the options you're choosing. If I am playing you and I don't have to consider, oh, what if he does air dodge this way? Oh, what if he does drift to the ledge? If I'm not asking myself these other questions and not having to look out for these new things, then I'm just going to press the button. I'm going to choose the option that beats what you're doing, and then I'm using the rest of my conscious mind on other parts of the game. You're making everything easier for the one player by submitting to a bad situation. And I think that it's really easy for a lot of people, especially at mid-level, to get super caught up in, oh, this is just too good of a spot, too bad of a spot, or, oh, this spot doesn't actually matter that much because I know what you're going to do kind of thing. You have to consider both. They go hand in hand. How well you can read people has a lot to do with how well you understand the situations in which you're trying to read them, cash out, or just retain information. And a lot of these like pivotal points in the match, like you said, with the Palutena down throw near the ledge, those happen everywhere. Just being in the ledge in general, being in the corner against Cloud is just like that. You don't have a lot of options. So it's not that complicated for the Cloud to pick one of your 4 options, or at least one of the options that he can cover everything in like one of 4 ways. And it's simple, and you're like, oh, well, I guess I should just jump out of the corner every time. No, of course you shouldn't do that. It's important to always give your opponent something else to worry about to mix that in, so they can't just assume. And it's just as important as understanding like the risk behind which option can get hit. Understanding the balance and letting those two things work with each other are going to improve your decision making in every facet of the game. Uh, and it can be hard, but it's important to always try to pay attention. Just so you have something to go off of, you can take more from the situation. It's better in every way to keep in mind both facets of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big part of why the best players of the strongest characters in the game are so clearly etched out amongst the masses. And so let's take Steve as a very obvious example. The Steve minecart, in and of itself, I will minecart because it's strong. Minecart is objectively a very strong option, but if you knew that the powered minecart was coming at the same timing and spacing every time, then the minecart has really lost a lot of its, its potency by nature of predictability. And that's why a character like Steve, piloted by Aquila, is so dangerous, because Steve has a million different ways to present a new situation to you, even in the worst scenarios. There is always the looming threat of the instant powered minecart that kills you in 100 full stage, but there's also blocks and anvils and a million different variables that you can introduce, and then it turns areas of the game that are normally very weak for Steve into almost strengths. You can stand on a block and threaten the minecart sort of indefinitely, and that is really what sets apart the best players of the best characters from the mid-level, when they understand how to present new situations and make the circumstances so difficult to keep track of that it's unreasonable to make reads. A lesser example of this with a strong character is Spargo in Disadvantage, his usage of Cloud's down air. Down air in and of itself is sort of like the stereotypical scrub mash button out of Disadvantage thing, is pressing the downer and drifting hard in. So why will we still see that at the highest levels of play when Spargo, who is arguably the best player in the world, is piloting the character and it hits? Well, Spargo is good at taking the situation and introducing variables. Cloud has great airspeed, and so you can show the drift like you're going to press the downer and then nod and jump away. You can just drift out, land like a normal character. You can do the downer at more less reactable timing. So like on reaction, them jumping at you, you press it. You can press the downer and then use Cloud's airspeed to drift away. And so the existence of all those different nuanced layers of just the down air in his drift make it to where when he presses the down air, finally, he goes for the strong down air and drifts hard into his opponent, that they are forced to deal with that amidst a array of variables. And that works on the offensive end as well. Really, there are a lot of really good Cloud players that will just back air, but Spargo will show back airs, show cross slashes. He'll play more around platforms. He'll introduce full hops and short hops, different layers of mix, and adding these additional layers to your gameplay is a really core element of ensuring that your opponent is not able to get like those easy reads. And I guess sort of to bring it back to what we're talking about, it's really it sounds very obvious to say if you mix up your options, then you're harder to read. But it's important to have a basic understanding of what it actually means to meaningfully mix up what you're doing. And I feel like a lot of players, when they're starting out and they're really leaning into this is what makes my character strong, it's sort of easy to lose that understanding of why the strong thing is strong. Cloud's back air is really only a part of a whole, and when you introduce things like Cloud up B and cross slash into the mix, then that's what really empowers Cloud's back air to be as strong as it is. So that's just something I wanted to touch on real quick at the end here, was understanding that the strengths of your character dictate what reads your opponent makes, but on the same end, it should also be something that you're consciously aware of, so you're able to sort of see the whole puzzle, if that makes sense.
For sure. If there was one more thing that I wanted to touch on before we go, I wanted to talk about things like Spargo grabs. And I'm not going to say that Cloud grab is bad. A lot of the time it puts you off stage and I have to deal with Cloud back here in the corner or something like that, right? But it's not the immediate best scary option. And you're going to see that a lot. We mentioned earlier with conditioning and how a lot of the time you'll take weaker hits in neutral because they're kind of guaranteed. Your opponent is avoiding the scary thing, and you're like, okay, well, you've shown me that you do this here, so I'm just going to take this hit because it's safer to hit. That's like passive, quick reads to force different situations, so you're not just playing stalemates all the time, right? If you watch Spargo, if you watch Light, watch Sonics, I want you to watch these top players and look at where they grab. It's not just grabs, obviously, but with a character like Cloud, Spargo is playing these people, these top level people, and he's just grabbing them over and over. There's a set, I want to say it was like Delfino, where he just grabs Gluto like 7 times in like 20 seconds. Because you're presenting like a strong situation, you're showing the big stick. I have the big stick, and then they're like, well, I have 2 options. And then he's grabbing them over and over. And it's an important thing that goes hand in hand because we talked a lot about cashing out and paying attention to risk reward, which is super important, especially with kind of like game winning decisions. You know, how do I clutch this out? But it's also important to be mindful of how, I don't like the word guaranteed, but for lack of a better term, guaranteed soft reads. As these fast characters like Sheik and Fox are going to get a lot of really easy grabs. Because players just have to see them moving in a certain spot, and their general solutions to things are just going to be shields here, shield there. And it's important to keep up with the pace in that sense. Because otherwise, even though it's not like the scariest thing in the world when you're getting grabbed here or there, and it's not just grabs, this applies to anything, just like low reward. Diddy Kong is kind of based off of this as a character. He is almost always making you deal with something very quickly, watching how you deal with it, and introducing this new mix where he's willing to grab you, he's willing to down tilt you, he's willing to stuff you out in the air, and just staying on top of this. I feel like we didn't give as much attention to the softer side of callouts and reads, but it is just as important. It's what makes the game move along. Another great example is Mars. You can watch Mars hit people with the most non-threatening grabs, fairs, so many times in a game, and then he hits like this huge combo, stock 2, and then they just die. And it's like, how is he always right? How is he always hitting this? And it's the same thing where you're just showing the big stick, or you're showing them a stick really fast, like a lot. That's kind of what Sheik and Fox do. Spargo playing Cloud, it's more of volatile interactions over and over, where it's like, well, I have to respect this thing. And in both situations, it's being ahead of the curve. It's showing something, conditioning something, paying attention to how they're responding to it. And sometimes you hold it, you cash it out in the important spot. Sometimes you take the quick little victories to make sure the situation is changing to something you might like more next time. And that's a very important part, because otherwise you'll get these players that are just stalemating you and denying you of your win cons the entire game. And you can't have that, right?
Right. And I think that with keeping that in mind, I think that is realistically a good place to stop for today, unless you have any closing things you wanted to add. That seems like a natural conclusion. Do you have anything, or are we good to end it?
I think we're good. It's a broad topic. It's difficult to condense it all into one thing, because there's so much to consider. But that kind of is the topic. There is so much to consider, and it's okay that you don't always know which thing to pick, which answer is the right one. You just want to be willing to look at it all and take it into account. Use your own decision making. You'll develop with it, and you will kind of find yourself as a player and how you're going to make these reads, when you're going to do them, how you're going to do them. It's a difficult thing. It's overwhelming, but it's like that for everybody, and there's a lot of potential out there in it for you.
Definitely. And I'm sure that it's something that we're going to come back to like frequently because, it's like the foundation of everything in the game
Yeah,
is the information
mental warfare.
Yeah, exactly. Um, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for watching once again. If you enjoy the sound of our voices, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, as I said last time, and also follow us on Twitter at practical_SSB, where we'll regularly post updates, clips, tips, etc. All things Smash Bros. Ultimate. And once again, I'd like to remind you all that we have links to the Discord and Ko-Fi in our description. Those will be great ways to follow and support the channel. And like I said, we're going to have some good things in store for the Ko-Fi in the future, and you can get access to it for as little as $2 a month. And it goes a long way in supporting us and ensuring that we're able to do this every week. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye once again, and we'll see you next week. See you guys.